Ah, the Imperial rise of the rising sun. We've now seen that in 1868, Japan got Meiji'd. That's right, I just made a noun into a verb. The 1868 Meiji Restoration revolutionized Japan from the inside out. And unlike all other Asian powers in the Asian hood, Japan became modernized, industrialized, westernized, and most importantly, militarized. That's right. They had a military that was on par with Western powers. Japan is now strong, not yet a world power, but Japan is strong, especially compared to its weak Asian neighbors. And therefore, Japan copied another Western European innovation of sorts, and that is imperialization. Japan looked at what Europe had done and they said, hey, look, these guys went and took over huge chunks of the rest of the world. They've got more territory, more resources, more stuff by simply going out and taking it over in colonies and in straight up imperial fashion. And the Japanese thought to themselves, that's a good idea. We do that too. And of course, they did. Thus launches the imperial phase of Japan, which caused a lot of friction in Asia at the time, the remnants of which we can still see in today's world. So let's quickly look at the rise of Godzilla, the Japanese imperial phase. And please, while we go through this, keep in mind the timeline here. We're talking about very condensed periods of time that all this action happens. To start it off, 1868, the Meiji Restoration. Before 1868, the Japanese are fighting with swords, okay? Samurais during the Shogun period. Very behind, isolated, technologically inept. Just 3 decades later, in fact, less than 3 decades from fighting with swords, in 27 years, the Meiji Restoration produces a Japan powerful enough to challenge China in a war and win. Whoa, what? This is crazy. In 1895, the Sino-Japanese War kicks off, fighting over the Korean Peninsula. The Japanese are going to start their imperial phase by taking over other territories to gain resources. And the Chinese are going to try to block those efforts. And in doing so, get smacked down for their efforts. The Chinese are stunned by this. Stunned. Anyone in the rest of the world paying attention is also stunned. Because up to this point, China is the main power in this part of the world. No questions asked. Japan is a no-name, no-nothing group of islands on the peripheral edge, a vassal state on the edge of Chinese power. And here they are, in 1895, challenging the Chinese and handily winning. But that's not the end of Chinese humiliation under the hand of Japan. Just 5 years later, in 1900, Japan helps an international coalition repress a rebellion within China. It's called the Boxer Rebellion. And without going in great detail here, the Boxers were a group of yahoos who took over the diplomatic quarters in Nanjing, the capital of China at the time, because China's disintegrating, their political system is crap. And these guys take a bunch of international hostages. And the world response is swift and powerful and includes the Japanese. The United States, the Russians, the Brits, the Germans, the French, and the Japanese all get together and send in a force into China to smash this rebellion down and free their hostages. This is particularly embarrassing for the Chinese because they're looking at these foreign devils from the West saying, these Westerners are on our soil, invading our sovereign state, but worse than that, the Japanese are helping them. What? How much more humiliation could we suffer? Oh, they're just getting warmed up. The point here is that Japan is invited to participate with Western powers. They are now considered a kind of equal of Western powers. That's significant. But the Japanese aren't going to rest with just that because they are now powerful enough. They're going to challenge the Western powers themselves. And in 1905, they declare war on Russia. What? What? Back it up. Back the boat up. Exactly. It's all about the boats. Japan starts to move more into Russian territory in the east side of Asia. And Russia's like, what is going on here? Send the entire Russian Navy around to squash this small group of islands. What are they thinking about challenging the most ginormous land empire on the planet? So the Russians sent their entire fleet out from the Black Sea, through the Mediterranean, sailed all the way around Africa, through the Indian Ocean, through Southeast Asia, up the Asian coast, where the Japanese Navy was waiting for them to kaboom, blow them all up and sink them to the bottom of the Pacific in about 15 minutes. Yes, It was the most one-sided naval battle in history. Russia loses about 32 of 36 ships in less than 15 minutes. It's that bad. And this is a serious wake-up call to Russia, who is flabbergasted. What? We just lost our whole navy to who? Japan? People can't even find Japan on a map at this point. And here they've now beaten the Chinese and the Russians. This is a real wake-up call for Western powers in particular. China's already woke up. Now the West is like, hey, who are these Japanese guys? They're pretty strong, and the Japanese are just getting warmed up. They're now 2-0 against major world powers, and they're going to start the ball rolling even further into Asia. In 1917, they annex even more Russian territory over in the east, while Russia's busy with that communist Bolshevik revolution stuff. In 1931, they penetrate further into Chinese territory, taking over this entire huge swath of northeast China called Manchuria. In 1931, all the way to 1940, they establish more footholds on coastal China and major ports of call all across Southeast Asia, sending in traders, sending in economic entities and businesses, but also covertly moving in soldiers, preparing for the next wave of aggression. And that next wave hits about 1937, where they are prepared sufficiently enough, and Japan is ready to unveil their grand scheme of an Asian empire, and they do this in 1937 by declaring war on China. They're just going to take over the place, lock, stock, and barrel. China is weak. Everybody knows it. Japan might as well own it. They also go ahead and launch in 1941 their invasion and takeover of all other Southeast Asian countries as well. And by the way, they get into those Southeast Asian nations mostly without a fight. They're welcomed in. What? How could that? How can you have an invading force welcomed in? Japan came up with this awesome propaganda scheme in 1938 called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. That's a mouthful. It was then, and it still is now. And it was a mouthful of bull, because what it was a great campaign to convince Asians that Japan was the good guys. I know, it sounds crazy, but Japan said, hey, Asian people, look, you are colonized and controlled by Western Europeans, by a bunch of whiteys from over there. Why? These people ain't doing you no favors. They are your imperial masters, and look at their skin. They're whiteys from European. Look at us. We're Asians like you. So we're going to come in and help liberate you from the Western European imperial dogs. And most people in Burma and Vietnam and Indonesia were like, yay, that sounds great. Japan's a serious Asian force. They're Asian like us. And open the door. Come on in. Help kick out the Frenchies and the Brits and the Germans. That's a great idea. We might even help you out. And some did. So this Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was a great success in limiting the wartime engagements Japan even had to deal with down in Southeast Asia. But of course, it's all BS. Japan is not trying to liberate Burma or Vietnam. They're simply going to displace the European imperialists to take over themselves. Again, in a grander scheme of building a huge Asian empire. And they only had kind of one major hiccup along the way of building this grand Asian empire, and that was, of course, in 1941. They accidentally attack the United States. The December 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor, where they sank a large portion of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, under the delusion, perhaps, that America was going to do nothing about it. This, of course, was not an attempt to take over Hawaii or the United States. It was basically marking the fence. Japan had now at this point considered itself a major world player, and it was. And they're saying, hey, U.S., you're over there. You're a world power. We're here. We're a world power. Let's just go and establish the fence here. We're going to bomb you over there because that is the edge. You guys can have Hawaii and everything up to California. Don't tread on our territory over here. Again, they were under the delusion that perhaps the United States would be like, oh, okay, well, we didn't know you had a fence. So we got a fence, everything's cool, that's good. Oh, hell no! Of course, all this did was infuriate the United States and force them to declare war on Japan. The inevitable conclusion of which you're going to know in 1945 when Hiroshima and Nagasaki go boom. Had it not been for their aggression against the United States and their inevitable loss to the United States, we really have no idea how far this Asian empire would have expanded and how history would have unfolded. At its height in the 40s, Japan's imperial empire controlled all of East Asia, most of China, all of East Asia, the Korean Peninsula, all of Southeast Asia, half the Pacific. And there were designs to invade and take over Australia and India. Let me repeat that. Designs to take over Australia and India and perhaps beyond. And again, this is not a hypothesis. This isn't rumor. There were concrete plans. Invasion forces were being ready to take over Australia, and railroad supply lines were being built across Burma to prepare for the invasion of India. We really have no idea how huge this Japan-centered Asian empire could have become. Now, why did they do all this? Are they just jerks? I mean, we talked about how awesome Japan was, this great culture. They just had a momentary lapse of reason? Well, perhaps. But what they didn't have was resources. And we've talked about this multiple times up to this point. Japan is resource poor. In order to be an economic, industrial, modernized power, you need stuff. You have to have energy to run your factories. You've got to have coal and oil. You have to have steel and aluminum and magnesium to produce stuff. You have to have stuff to keep your industry going, your economy going, and your military might going. And Japan didn't have it. Now, they could have continued to buy it from other places, but they really weren't an export power at the time. They didn't have a lot of cash. So option 2 was better. Go take it. Just go take the stuff you need to continue to roll and get bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, where should they get all that stuff? Where should they take their stuff from? How about from their weak-ass Asian neighbors, of course? But this imperial streak creates extreme Asian animosity between Asian countries and Japan, and really, really bad blood.